Thank you, Hans, for setting up the stage for me. Today, we have with us our distinguished guests from Netherlands, Tamara and Jos Bell. Jos, an RPA evangelist, has implemented successful RPA models in organizations around the world: Europe, US, Canada, Asia, Africa, and UK, just to name a few. Jos is a founder of intelligence automation firm New Dawn and a consultant in corporate strategy, and holds a master's in entrepreneurship and finance. Jos has worked as a management consultant with Logica, Novartis, and is with Capgemini for past 3 years. Please welcome Jos Bell, our next speaker.
Well, thank you everyone for joining today, and it's a pleasure. And it's a pleasure for us to be here today in Bangalore. Well, as you can as already mentioned, robotics and AI is definitely changing the way the market is moving, and it's well, already well known within organizations throughout the world that robotics is now the way to go, and companies are now afraid to be left out, so every company now wants to move into this area. That's also the reason for us to start New Dawn, because we noticed that there's a very large demand throughout the world in the area of robotics, RPA and artificial intelligence. We created a presentation for you today about what the market is saying, the future of work. But first of all, let's start with a brief introduction of ourselves. My name is Jos Bell, as already mentioned, founder of New Dawn, together with Tamara Monson. And we are focusing on the areas of robotics, people in digital, data strategy, artificial intelligence, and analytics. And these are our sweet spots, and where we have a lot of knowledge and capabilities. And well, we see that there's so much demand throughout the world that this is just a very interesting time for us as well to be working. But let's first take a step back and look at what the market is saying. Well, if we look at all the different large organizations, whether it's the World Economic Forum, McKinsey, Horses for Sources, the common denominator is that everybody is saying the market is going to fundamentally change in the next 10 years. The way we are working right now is going to completely transform, because robots are taking over a lot of jobs, and that also creates some uncertainty. But also, that's based on my own experience, is it also creates a lot of enthusiasm with people. And it also depends on how do you bring this message, what are you going to do, and how are you going to start with robotics and help organizations make that transformation. It's really exciting, and people usually do not see this as a threat yet. In some places, yes, they do, but most of them are really enthusiastic and are willing also to learn new capabilities to basically see if the robot is going to take a lot of the mundane work that I'm doing right now, and I only have fun stuff to do. That's going to be great. So how are we going to facilitate that? If we look at the impact of the workforce, if you look at at research that has been done, the robots are not going to take up all of the work. It's only going to take up some parts of the work. And I think that's what you see in most of the research that has been done, where we basically see robots are going to be co-workers, or are going to be taking up some of the parts of the work that we humans are basically not designed for to do. So what we're basically doing is taking the robot out of the human, and yet that the human do more of the creative, the thinking, and do the stuff that robots are not really capable of doing right now. And Another threat that is sometimes seen is that it's just a cost-cutting exercise. But if we look at this research, it's not. Companies are mainly looking at investing in AI and robotics because they want to have a competitive advantage. They want to get into a new business, or they are afraid that other companies are entering this business, so they need to invest in this, and they need to start innovating, entering new areas, because it's just a necessity. Also, another common denominator is that we see this throughout all different markets. If we look at the big effect today, roughly 15 to 25% of different industries think that it's going to have an impact right now. But if you look in the impact for the next 5 years, 60 to 70% of companies throughout different industries are saying this is going to heavily impact my way of working. And I think, and that's also what we saw with robotics when we did research 2 years ago, and we looked at where do people think that, or organizations think that robotics is going to have effect. That there was only 40% of organizations said, well, within finance, we think that robotic process automation is going to have an effect. If we did that 18 months later, it was 95%. So you will see these percentages go up as organizations are also learning about what is robotic process automation, what is artificial intelligence, what can it do, what can't it do. There's so much education to be done with organizations throughout the world. I think 50% of my time is about educating business in what is a robot, what can a robot do, or what can artificial intelligence do. I see people already nodding and saying yes, and that's exactly how it works, because people sometimes have no clue. Organizations are sometimes saying, okay, so this is my process. It's basically, well, crap, to be honest. It's a lot of things pulled together and people are doing a lot of manual work. Can you please have a robot for this? And then you really need to look at the organization and the process and then say, well, look, you need to take a step back and you need to do a lot of other stuff before you can go into robotics, because your organization is not ready for this yet. So there's also a lot of education to be done as to what can a robot do, where is artificial actually possible or not, where is the business case, and is it actually, does it make sense to do that? So we've developed a methodology for that to help organizations start off right from the get-go, because it's so important to do this correctly. Then what is the effect on the long term for organizations? Because we definitely see that the skills that most people are having right now are not going to be sufficient in the next 10 years. The market is changing, and well, to be able to get that sustainable growth, grow top line, but also reduce your bottom line costs, there's a lot of things that people now need to do, because I've had companies just recently, a month ago in the UK for instance, where they had a lot of people just doing operational activities, just manual stuff, keying in data, day in, day out. It's crazy. And you can just have a robot for that doing that for you, and you just focus on the things that are really adding value to the business. Because essentially that's what you're talking about. Adding value to the business, or giving time back to the business, and really focus on those value-adding activities. And a robot can do that for you, or can create new insights and support that decision-making. So if we look at the 10 skills that are really going to be necessary to really embed within your organization, what is the complex problem solving? Well, we usually do not see, sometimes even within our organization, or even departments within organizations, there are boundaries. They do not oversee that full end-to-end process or see where the complexity is. Well, can you imagine that between organizations or between different industries? We humans are usually not capable of seeing that brighter picture and seeing the whole end-to-end process, or seeing where the relationships are. Now that we have big data, for instance, we can get those analysis, we can get those insights, and now it's up to us to do that complex problem solving. Also critical thinking. what we sometimes see, especially with chatbots, for instance, they are able of getting, you ask them a question, they give you insights, but it's not always possible for them to get that real critical thinking as to, you know, what are we actually looking for? And that's what we humans are really good at. Creativity. Well, sometimes AI systems can be a little bit creative, but it's only if you taught them to do that. But they're very good at getting those real complex information together for us humans to make those decisions. Creativity is still a very, very important skill that we humans have to find solutions for different scenarios. People management. What we also see sometimes, and that's what where Tamara and I had some very good discussions on, if we look into the future, we actually see that it's becoming more and more important for people to be self-managers of their own, well, maybe digital workforce even. So that also means that you're going to have different people skills, not just on an operational level, but also on a tactical and strategic level. Coordinating cross capabilities. Effective communication, and especially communication between people, is going to be so very important. AI and robotics can do that operational activities for you. It can really reduce your workload. It can do a lot of work for you. But the time that we then have available, it should be used for working together, cross-collaboration, and really find where is the added value. Also the emotional intelligence. Chatbots, as mentioned, are very good at getting that data and transforming that into, I have a question, here's your solution. But sometimes there's a different emotional discussion that someone wants to have with the organization. It's maybe not really an answer to a question, but there's something behind that. Well, AI can sometimes, well, it can already understand the emotion sometimes and measure that emotion. So someone in a call center, for instance, can relate to that. So it's really helpful for that. But the real emotional intelligence, systems do not have that capability yet. And I think it's very good for an organization if you're available to, or if you're capable of seeing the emotion through a conversation with somebody. And you can already counter your reactions based on what the system is giving you as, oh, well, this person is now getting angry, I need to give this kind of answers. So you get a very more clear understanding and a very good relational bonding with your clients. Very important. Judgment and decision making still. It's good that we have a lot of data that we can now make better decisions and get better solutions. But still, judgment and decision making is still something that we humans need to do. And we need to train our people in giving those better judgments. The service orientation, well, I think that also relates to the chatbots with the support of the emotions, etc. It can then give you a better customer experience because that's what organizations are looking for. A better customer satisfaction is going to eventually drive your top line growth and is going to help you keep your customers and keep them happy. Negotiation. It's going to be interesting if we are going to have two AI systems trying to negotiate some kind of outcome, but I don't think that that's something that we can do. So it's still going to be some human interaction needed, I guess, to really get that good win-win situation. So, and the cognitive flexibility. Systems can, of course, give some bit of an insight into what kind of emotion is the customer in, for instance, and how do I need to respond to that. But the systems are not capable of giving that right direction, but it can give you as a human or a customer service representative the right kind of feedback to see, okay, so I need to move into this direction. It can give suggestions. But of course, the human interaction and the human involvement is still going to be very critical. Now, if we look at the top 5 industry sectors that are going to be in very high demand, it's of course going to be the technological and computational thinking. It's also the caregiving. You see a lot of interesting developments in the hospital markets, for instance, with getting AI systems to already give more insights into radiology, for instance, but also if you need to have a new arm or a new leg or all those kinds of things, there's so many exciting things going on right now. Social intelligence and media, of course, and this is also related to AI. There's so much development going on at this point in time. The other one, lifelong learning. Of course, because there is so much development going on right now, we as humans cannot just sit back and relax. But what we already said about 5 years ago is that it's a lifelong learning. This is now only going to be accelerated because there's way more need right now, because AI systems are going this fast, that it's really necessary for us to see what are now the capabilities that my workforce need to have or need to develop to be able to get the right customer service level, to make sure that we are able to support our customers and keep them happy customers. And adaptability and business acumen. If we then look at the top 10 demanding jobs, data analytics is number one, and I think that's not really a surprise maybe, but there's such a huge demand. I don't know how it is here in India, but I know in Europe it's really difficult to find very good candidates that have very good data analytical skills. A lot of universities are right now moving into this and trying to scale this up, where I think in India they already have done this over the last few years, and they're way advanced compared to Europe and also America. And that's an interesting thing, because when I was building up my workforce in robotics in Europe, it was very difficult to find the right people. And it was such a nightmare to find the right people with the right qualities. And I think here in India, they have a lot of people already in this area. And that's why it's really good that it was already a global economy. But you can see right now that it's just increasing, because there's so much demand in this area. It's crazy. People within the medical business, as already mentioned, there's so much developments going on also in the medical departments, medical world, not just with like the radiology, but also prosthetics, all those kinds of things. There's a lot of things going on right now with developments, just because we can. Sales and marketing, top line growth, customer service representatives, again, focus on the added value. Let the robot get all the data for you, so you're able to get a good conversation with your clients and give them better advice or better solutions, just because you know what the customer's looking for, you know how to bond with the customer based on the emotion that the customer is showing you, and you can respond to that. It's very important. Management analysts, there's so much data, and it's good to have that data analytics, but what are we going to do with that as management, and how do we need to focus on that? So the need for business information managers, for instance, is going to increase significantly, because they're also turning the data into strategic decisions. Of course, the software development, developers and computer programmers, well, I think this is in Europe already an issue. The demand for robotic process automation is so big that the market cannot cope with this. So what we usually do, what I usually did when I was building these kinds of projects with customers worldwide, is that we were training people from the customer side, not just because it's better for an organization to build that capability as such, but also because we were not able to cope with that demand. It was ridiculous, basically. But again, that's also interesting to see. Maybe one that's on the list which you would not imagine, veterinarians. It's interesting, but again, some of the specific jobs, because this is such a huge market now. People are also choosing other kinds of professions, and that also has an effect on other jobs as well. Product designers and creatives, because there is such a interesting developments, and we find new applications for this, for all these kinds of AIs, but also robotics. That, you know, building this industry to make it also an attractive product, or to see how can we make sure that customers are going to adapt to this, that its possibilities are immensely advancing. Teachers and trainers. That's not just for high schools and universities, but also for training academies that also need to cope with, you know, we need experts in these areas, but where are they? And where can you find these kinds of things? There's such a vast demand and so much need within companies, but they just basically don't know where to find that capabilities. Accountants and auditors. Well, as our organization is trying to reduce those kinds of accounting and auditing purposes by building robots for implementing control frameworks done by robots and AIs. We'll hopefully see if we can get that out of the top 10 for the next coming years, but still there's a large demand. I think also within large accounting firms that they might not like to hear this this message, but as within finance departments, there's a very good possibility for implementing robotics. Why not develop a robot that can do all the controls and checks for you? Just send it out to the auditors and say, look, we did all the processes, we're compliant, we have the outcome for you, here's the report, now let's renegotiate our contract prices. That's actually what one of my clients in Germany said a year ago when we started robotics, when she was like, hey, so why not implement this for a whole control framework and see if we can reduce the price for external auditing by about 25%. Makes sense, eh? This is what we think is going to happen within the next 3 to 5 years in this market. And I think it's a very interesting time to be working in this area, in this field. There's so much going on, so many developments. And if I look back at when I started in this area 3 years ago and where we're right now, it's just going to be a huge, exciting opportunity for all of us to be working in this area, because it's so dynamic, there's so many possibilities, and it's really interesting to be working in this, and that's just, it's an energy boost for me. And that's also, you know, why I would like to encourage you also to, you know, continue working on this, exploring in this, making mistakes, but also learning and growing, because it's an interesting time. And that's it from our perspective. Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So when you say top 10 demand, jobs in demand, are you talking about the gap or the volume of the jobs?
It's the volumes of the jobs, but then again, because there's so much demand for it, there's also going to be gaps related to this. So if you are now talking to I know your daughters are a little bit too young, but if they would go to university, well, I would say pick up one of the top 3 and you're going to be set for the rest of your life. But it's definitely going to it's the volumes actually that's already needed, but there's already a gap there, and it's only going to get bigger, for sure.
And then to add on that, if you look at in the Netherlands, the universities at the moment, they just can't they can't take on the students.
Yeah.
So they're closing the university at the moment because they don't have teachers on the top 3.
Yeah.
So if you look at data analytics, it's a huge gap that's going to be even bigger in the future, because we can't deliver, we can't train our people, we can't train our youngsters. So, but that's also an opportunity for like yourself, for India, because you know you have the capabilities and you are growing and you are building this knowledge expertise much faster, basically, than we are currently doing.
Yes.
So it's it will change the dynamics.
Yes, and I think that's a common denominator throughout Europe and America, actually, where they were very slow in building those capabilities and really investing in this. And from that perspective, India is way ahead, and I think that's really good. That also builds a very interesting proposition for seeing, how can you get that knowledge and transform it into capabilities in other countries as well. I think the universities, as Tamara said, and then that's within Europe and America, they're now building a lot of these kinds of academic programs to really into data science, for instance, all those kinds of things, data analytics. It's too late. It's going to take at least 4 years before these people are going to enter the market. If you see already the demand right now, that's crazy. Any more questions?
I'd be interested to know, do we have any insights on how China as a country is doing in this space? Because in terms of really advancement in data science, my belief is that I think surely the pie really lies between India, US and China.
Yeah.
And what is the level of advancement right now, and where is the rest of the world?
Yeah. I think I don't have data on China as such, but yes, China is, especially in some areas, they're really advanced. Especially if you look at what the Chinese governance, for instance, is looking with all the cameras and then recognizing, doing all facial recognitions.
Sure.
They're doing it for a wrong cause, of course, but they're really advanced in that perspective. But I think they're really investing in this very heavy. They are really far from that perspective. I think the issue that they mainly have is their language barriers still. Not just from a language perspective in writing and speaking, but also with coding and those kinds of things, which is completely different. So they're a little bit isolated. So internally, yes, they can do a lot, but I think they need to do a lot to make it an export product from their perspective. And that's of course the benefit that they have in India, because they're already outsourcing was the first wave of a lot of labor moving to India. And this is also why robotics is, for instance, really big already within India, because that's where it started. Now I have quite some discussions with clients in Europe and America where they're saying, well, I outsourced my work to India, but I believe I could do it quicker and cheaper by insourcing my process again and using robots for it. So either here in India, there's already a lot going on in this topic, and they're doing a lot of robotics. Capgemini, for instance, is reducing their workforce in India by 50 FTEs a month, just because they're building robots to do that kind of work. That's mainly outsourcing. But can you imagine on a broader scale how this is going to turn out? So it's also, from that perspective, operational activities are not going to cut it. You need to move into added value activities. That's basically the key message.
And I think the benefit of China is the fact that the government is behind it, so completely focused. But if you can't integrate cultures, it's very, it will also be something that will make it valuable, but for them. And like you're saying, I think it's very interesting to see how you can actually merge cultures and build together in a world that is basically getting more and more connected. So I see advantages and I see disadvantages of the way the progress is being formed in China.
Okay.
Yes,
Go ahead.
So we heard a lot about this caring puppy, and but I was just wondering that it's more of people required in the future is more towards the functional side, or is it in a technology?
I think especially from the technical side. I think if we look in the situation in Europe and America, there's a very large deficit in real strong robot developers. Whether it's in robotic process automation or in the area of AI, there's a lack of basically implementation skills. People with the real technical skills, good technical background to develop. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I think just to add, because Jos is the technical guy, and you know, I'm more the person who looks at the impact on, you know, the human factor.
Yeah.
I think it's very important, if you want to win, that you take notice of the fact that you have, you know, the humans will not be replaced on a very short notice. They need to be open, and they need to be willing to adapt. They need to be willing to do things differently.
Yeah.
So, like was shared on the workforce element, the emotional factor will be very important, because you will need to have different kind of managers.
Yes.
And the people who do now the practical work need to become managers of their own, and that's a different skill set. Even if you need to manage your robotic workforce, you need to think of, how do I build in a feedback, which is very important being a manager, giving feedback to people, telling them that they do how to improve their work. Well, that won't be the same in the technical human integration. So I think that the emphasis will be on both. So you will have people who are very skilled in technical elements that can benefit from this wave, but also the people who have like very special emotional skills that can actually connect people, make them feel safe, because the circle of trust will be very important in this new set of working. So I agree, and I add a little bit on.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that's it from my perspective, Ashok. So back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.